va hasta el sur, va desde Modesto Méndez hasta Aguas Turbias, tanto en el norte como en el sur. Esta línea tiene 215 kilómetros de extensión.
De allí vino él, se buscó creo con los de la OEA y de allí vino el proyecto para acá, para Judá. Y fue que lo dieron el terreno y lo dieron todo que era mano de obra y el material para hacer las casas que están ahorita. Y por ese motivo estamos aquí viviendo todavía.
La misión continúa trabajando en la implementación de medidas de fomento de la confianza mientras aguarda el resultado del reclamo que está atendiendo la Corte Internacional de Justicia por la disputa marítima, territorial e insular. Nuestra oficina en la zona adyacencia realiza verificaciones a solicitud de ambos gobiernos, facilita reuniones y patrullajes conjuntos entre las Fuerzas Armadas y promueve una cultura de paz y cooperación entre las comunidades locales.
Children will be children. And they have harmony. They don't see each other as a different country, but they see each other that they're growing together.
Esta organización es el guardián regional en defensa de la democracia, la libertad y los derechos humanos. Los países se han comprometido con estos valores a través de instrumentos legales como la Carta Democrática Interamericana, la Convención Americana de Derechos Humanos y todas las demás convenciones interamericanas. Nuestro trabajo es mantener los más altos estándares. Debemos ser objetivos, analizar los hechos, denunciar cuando veamos corrupción, inequidad o amenazas a la libertad. En esos casos no podemos ser neutrales.
more than 100 years since the inauguration of this building, the OAS headquarters, our institution still brings together the peoples of the Americas to address our responsibilities as a partnership of nations. As we look to the future, our work must also focus on the construction of a positive agenda that continues to favorably impact millions of lives every day.
Development cooperation has always been a priority for the OAS. The OAS SETI works with all member states to identify common challenges and define solutions through policy dialogue, which is transformed into action through technical cooperation initiatives. Policy dialogue is central to our work in development. The OAS SETI convenes development leaders in 11 ministerial meetings and high-level processes on priority areas such as competitiveness, labor, education, among others. Technical cooperation initiatives emerge from ongoing dialogue and are therefore established with built-in political support. All of our actions place people at the center, generating a multiplier effect in the region. We enhance human capacity by working with key stakeholders.
Perfecto.
Muchas gracias.
Of people in the Americas. Our ability to deliver results relies on broad collaboration. Partnerships for Development, Cooperación Solidaria, is a unique OAS concept which recognizes that each member state, regardless of its size, wealth, or level of development, has value to share and can learn from others. This concept also includes close collaboration with other partners, amplifying our reach and impact. As we mark 70 years of work on development, we take a look back.
Muchas gracias. Con interpretación. Vamos a la cabina de inglés. Buenos días.
This long evolution, driven by member states, has fine-tuned our unique model to support inter-American development.
Segunda cabina de inglés.
Good morning, Benjamin here on the English channel. Check 1, 2, check 1, 2. Thank you very much.
Today, all of our efforts fall into 5 strategic priorities: inclusive and competitive economies, sustainable development, education and human development, decent work for all, development cooperation and partnerships. These are aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals and the regional attainment of the 2030 Agenda. These priorities are also areas where the OAS setting has extensive experience and proven impact.
Portugués, no tenemos a nadie en portugués. Ok. Dayan, ¿cómo estás? Muy bien, muy bien. Ok, perfecto. Perfecto, vamos a escuchar a Marilda ahora. Marilda. Longi, ahora sí. Muy bien. Gracias. Vamos a español ahora. Cambio de español. Estela. Muy bien. Excelente. Gracias. Segunda cabina de español. Susana. Muy bien, Susana. Gracias.
Thank you so much.
Muy bien. Buenos días, señora Ponce.
We have come a long way.
Muy bien, muchas gracias.
Bueno, gracias a usted. Todo bien, ¿verdad?
Excelente.
Sí, gracias.
Gracias.
But still have much work to do. "70 years ago, an inter-American dream and promise was enshrined in the OAS Charter. We can deliver on this promise. Our future leaders are counting on us."
Señor Pisa, vemos que no está entrando en pantalla. ¿Y puede por favor verificar si lo está haciendo a través de Chrome?
Me and my kids have been there for over an year right now. And children are friends. It doesn't matter where they come from.
Ahora sí. Ahora tienen que encender cámara y micrófono. Perfecto. Ahí escuchamos y todo.
Eso es lo único que tiene que hacer ahorita en video y llamada y vuelve a hacer lo que hizo ahorita para ponerlo por captura. Sí, la cara.
Si quiere probar la presentación para dudas antes de...
Nosotros estamos en
Tiene que abrir la celda.
una zona netamente selvática. La línea de adyacencia va desde el norte hasta el sur, va desde Modesto Méndez hasta Aguas Turbias, tanto en el norte como en el sur. Esta línea tiene 215 kilómetros de extensión.
Y ahora el botón azul grande, desconectar. Muchas gracias.
De allí vino él, se evocó creo con los de la OEA y de allí vino el proyecto para acá, para Judá. Y fue que los dieron el terreno y los dieron todo lo que era mano de obra y el material para hacer las casas que están ahorita. Y por ese motivo estamos aquí viviendo todavía.
La misión continúa trabajando en la implementación de medidas de fomento de la confianza mientras aguarda el resultado del reclamo que está atendiendo la Corte Internacional de Justicia por la disputa marítima, territorial e insular. Nuestra oficina en la zona de adyacencia realiza verificaciones a solicitud de ambos gobiernos, facilita reuniones y patrullajes conjuntos entre las Fuerzas Armadas y promueve una cultura de paz y cooperación entre las comunidades locales.
Children will be children. And they have harmony. They don't see each other as a different country, but they see each other that they're growing together.
I do have to speak English, so I think I'm ready. So I will just
embajador de Ecuador.
Financiera de la Unión Europea.
Embajadora Scioli.
No está entrando en pantalla. Vamos con el embajador Jati a ver. Embajador Jati.
Sí, buenos días, Néstor.
Buenos días.
Your ambassador Sydney, how are you? Good morning, Fernando.
No lo vemos, embajador.
Muy bien. Aquí está prendida la cámara.
Esta organización es el guardián regional en defensa de la democracia, la libertad y los derechos humanos. Los países se han comprometido con estos valores a través de instrumentos legales como la Carta Democrática Interamericana, la Convención Americana de Derechos Humanos y todas las demás convenciones interamericanas. Nuestro trabajo es mantener los más altos estándares. Debemos ser objetivos, analizar los hechos, denunciar cuando veamos corrupción, inequidad o amenazas a la libertad. En esos casos no podemos ser neutrales.
more than 100 years since the inauguration of this building, the OAS headquarters, our institution still brings together the peoples of the Americas to address our responsibilities as a partnership of nations. As we look to the future, our work must also focus on the construction of a positive agenda that continues to favorably impact millions of lives every day.
Development cooperation has always been a priority for the OAS. The OAS SETI works with all member states to identify common challenges and define solutions through policy dialogue, which is transformed into action through technical cooperation initiatives. Policy dialogue is central to our work in development. The OAS SETI convenes development leaders in 11 ministerial meetings and high-level processes on priority areas such as competitiveness, labor, education, among others. Technical cooperation initiatives emerge from ongoing dialogue and are therefore established with built-in political support. All of our actions place people at the center, generating a multiplier effect in the region. We enhance human capacity by working with key stakeholders. This strengthens institutions, improving policies and programs, benefiting millions of people in the Americas. Our ability to deliver results relies on broad collaboration. Partnerships for Development, Cooperación Solidaria, is a unique OAS concept which recognizes that each member state, regardless of its size, wealth, or level of development, has value to share and can learn from others. This concept also includes close collaboration with other partners, amplifying our reach and impact. As we mark 70 years of work on development, we take a look back. This long evolution, driven by member states, has fine-tuned our unique model to support inter-American development. Today, all of our efforts fall into 5 strategic priorities: inclusive and competitive economies, sustainable development, education and human development, decent work for all, development cooperation, and partnerships. These are aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals and the regional attainment of the 2030 Agenda. These priorities are also areas where the OAS SETI has extensive experience and proven impact. We have come a long way. But still have much work to do. "70 years ago, an inter-American dream and promise was enshrined in the OAS Charter. We can deliver on this promise. Our future leaders are counting on us."
Me and my kids have been there for over an year right now. And children are friends. It doesn't matter where they come from.
Nosotros estamos en una zona netamente selvática. La línea de adyacencia va desde el norte hasta el sur, va desde Modesto Méndez hasta Aguas Turbias, tanto en el norte como en el sur. Esta línea tiene 215 kilómetros de extensión.
De allí vino él, se evocó creo con los de la OEA.
Thank you very much. We will now stop the testing stage and begin the formal session. Mr. Chairman, connected and having done the sound and video tests, we have Argentina, Bahamas, Belize, Bolivia, Brazil, Canada, Chile, Colombia, Costa Rica, Dominica, Ecuador, El Salvador, United States, Grenada, Guatemala had some technical problems, Guyana, Haiti, Honduras, Jamaica, Mexico, Nicaragua, Panama, Paraguay, the Dominican Republic, St. Lucia, Suriname, Trinidad and Tobago, and Uruguay. We have quorum, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ASG. Good morning, distinguished permanent representatives and alternate representatives. Before we proceed to the adoption of the order of business today, let me congratulate the government and peoples of the following member states who recently celebrated their national days. St. Vincent and the Grenadines on October 27th, Antigua and Barbuda on November 1st, Panama and the Commonwealth of Dominica on November 3rd. Let me also congratulate the government and peoples of the United States on the recent general elections. I am pleased to declare this regular meeting of the Permanent Council convened to consider the items contained in the order of business CP/OD-2306/20, which I present for the consideration of the Council. There being no observations, we will proceed to approve it without amendments. Approved.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman. I see Venezuela is asking for the floor, but I'm not sure if it's about the agenda.
Okay. Venezuela, you recognize.
No, it's only about, Mr. Chairman, only to say that I am here.
Oh, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome, Venezuela. So item 1 is approved. Item 2 on the agenda is the presentation by the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the plurinational state of Bolivia, Her Excellency Karen Longaric Rodriguez, pursuant to the request from the Permanent Mission of Bolivia contained in document CP/INF 8780/20. On this occasion, the presentation of the distinguished foreign minister will be through a pre-recorded video.
Señora Audrey Marks, Presidente.
Ms. Audrey Marks, Chair of the Permanent Council, Secretary General Luis Almagro, Assistant Secretary General Nestor Mendez, Permanent Representatives. I'd like to thank the Secretary General, as well as the Secretariat for Strengthening Democracy and the Department of Electoral Cooperation, as well as the heads of the two recent EOMs in Bolivia, the former Foreign Minister of Costa Rica, Manuel Gonzalez, for presenting the report by the EOM on the recent elections held in Bolivia, the general elections. My government would like to reiterate its recognition and support for this EOM and the audit on the electoral fraud that occurred in 2019. We also thank the OAS for the presentation on the general elections held in Bolivia on October 18, 2020. Both reports were drafted with great professional integrity and technical expertise. The reports and the audit from 2019 show that the OAS today is not guided by political issues. It is guided by the highest international standards for electoral observation. I have the privilege of being the foreign minister, and my final act as foreign minister will be to address the Permanent Council to underscore the decisive role that the OAS has played in preserving democracy during this difficult transition period, which has lasted almost a year in my country. The constitutional government of President Áñez had the main objective of convening elections with full guarantees, with an independent electoral body and the participation of the EOM of the OAS, along with the European Union and other groups of international observers. As a result, we were able to achieve the main purpose of the transition government of President Áñez. The OAS report recognized that the government achieved this objective. Mr. Luis Arce was elected president of the plurinational state of Bolivia. The inauguration will take place on October 8th. Representatives, what better way can democracy be conducted when a government is able to convene elections and recognize the victory of a candidate that currently controls the parliament, but a party that was a threat to various members in the government? We wish the elected president the greatest success in the years to come, while respecting the rule of law and working towards reconciliation. Unfortunately, the Bolivian people wanted a peaceful democratic transition towards national reconciliation. But decisions were made by the previous Legislative Assembly. Before the transfer of power, the Legislative Assembly, made up of 2/3 of the MAS party, decided to take two decisions that violated the rule of law and led to political instability and conflicts in Bolivia. These members of parliament persecuted the president and advisors during that time. Protests broke out across the country, and the assembly approved a resolution that gave them an absolute majority so that they could approve decisions in the Senate and House of Representatives. This also applies to the upcoming Congress, which will begin its work on November 8th. There is an absolute majority now in the Congress, unlike what we saw in the past. Please understand, permanent representatives, that it is not democratic for legislators to decide and make decisions that will affect the next 5 years of the presidency. They are using their power and mechanisms that will allow their party to pass all bills and votes that they want to see passed. If we change the rules of the Legislative Assembly to accommodate the needs of that party, that is not ethical. It is completely anti-democratic. It harms the rule of law, and it undermines the credibility of Bolivian institutions. This has led to a great deal of unease and unnecessary tensions for the new government. These are malicious actions which reflect a breakdown in democratic institutions. It is very clear that the MAS party is willing to hold democratic elections, but is not willing to play by democratic rules. There can only be democracy if there is a legitimate election, as well as elected officials who follow the essential rules of a democracy, as governments and states have done upon committing to the OAS Charter and other key instruments. We know that most countries represented in the OAS are on the alert and are making sure that governments follow the rules of democracy as defined in the Inter-American Democratic Charter. But I would like to use this opportunity to wish all of you, as well as the chair of the Permanent Council, Ambassador Audrey Marks, the Secretary General and Assistant Secretary General, all of my thanks to you for receiving me today. Thank you very much.
I request the Permanent Mission of Bolivia to transmit our thanks to Her Excellency Karen Langaric Rodriguez for her presentation today. I now offer the floor to the member states for their comments. The chair recognizes Ambassador Simas of Brazil.
Chair, good morning. And thank you very much for giving me the floor. Good morning to the Assistant Secretary General and the Secretary General as well. Sir, on behalf of the government of Brazil, I would like to thank Foreign Minister Karen Langaric for her willingness to report to us today at the Permanent Council on the situation in Bolivia. Brazil would like to commend the constitutional government of Janine Áñez and the authorities in Bolivia for the atmosphere of calm in which the recent elections took place. We believe that the transition led by President Áñez fulfilled the main mission, which was to hold fair, credible, and transparent elections. I also wish to recognize the professionalism of the OAS electoral observation missions in 2019 and 2020 in Bolivia, as well as the mission that studied the credibility of the 2019 election. Despite the baseless claims that were received, last year's electoral mission did not neglect its duty to report the serious errors in the process and the disrespect for the most basic principles of democracy. At that time, the OAS helped avoid the consummation of electoral fraud in Bolivia. Mr. Chair, Brazil is happy that the elections held ended up being free and fair and upheld the principles of representative democracy in Bolivia, as well as the principles held in the OAS Democratic Charter and the Inter-American Democratic Charter. The sovereign will of the Bolivian people has been respected. Chair, on behalf of the Brazilian government, I would like to commend Luis Arce and David Choquehuanca on their election as the president and vice president of the plurinational state of Bolivia, and we would like to commend the Bolivian people on holding harmonious and peaceful elections. I would also be remiss if I did not recognize the independent action taken by the Supreme Electoral Tribunal in organizing the vote, counting the votes, and the democratic attitude of President Áñez's actions from the beginning. Brazil commends Bolivia on recognizing the popular will expressed at the polls. Lastly, I would like to recognize the important participation of the independent electoral observers that supported this mission. Beyond the OAS, we should mention the Carter Center of the United States and the European Union, whose oversight helped to strengthen the legitimacy of this election. Lastly, I would like to personally send my thanks to the ambassador who bids us farewell today and leaves the council. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ambassador, for those comments. The chair now offers the floor to His Excellency Ordonez of Colombia.
Chair, Secretary General, Ambassadors, Foreign Minister Karen Longarek, welcome to this Permanent Council. Colombia thanks you for your presentation and your ongoing interest in keeping us abreast of events in your country. On behalf of my government, I would like to recognize the efforts and work carried out by the government of Bolivia and its efforts to hold elections on October 18th. An environment of peace, democratic guarantees, and respect for citizens. The winner was Luis Arce. We commend him and wish him the very best. And we wish the same to the Bolivian people. Madam Foreign Minister, it is essential for Bolivia to maintain peace and stability during this time. Institutions have the fundamental duties of respecting the democratic system, such that all stakeholders can play their roles on the basis of liberty and equity. It would be a bad precedent to change the rules in order to favor a specific party or group. The Bolivian people participated freely and peacefully in these elections on October 18th. They must be represented in the decisions that are made by the new authorities. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Excellency. The Chair now recognizes Ambassador Adsett of Canada.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. Chair, Secretary General, Assistant Secretary General, Minister of Foreign Affairs of the plurinational state of Bolivia, Ms. Karen Longarek. Over the past year, Bolivia has faced a very difficult time in its history. The country had to contend with events challenging its democratic resilience. There have been times of uncertainty, and elections were complicated by the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. However, Bolivia stayed the course. It held free, fair, and transparent elections this year. This is a testament to the strength and resilience of the Bolivian people.
Bolivia's electoral authorities for their commitment to overcome the serious challenges that were encountered a year ago. Free, fair, and inclusive elections, organized periodically by strong institutions and conducted in accordance with international standards, are an essential component for any democracy. Canada was pleased to have joined with other international partners, including the OAS, to support Bolivia's technical preparations for these critical elections. We congratulate Luis Arce on his election as president and the Bolivian people for this recent peaceful election. We look forward to working with the newly elected government, and we encourage all parties to remain committed to a process of national reconciliation, respecting human rights and democratic values. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. The Chair gives the floor to Ambassador Jahiva of Ecuador.
Thank you, Chair. I am pleased to welcome the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Bolivia, Ms. Karen Longarek Rodriguez, and thank her for her presentation on the recent elections in Bolivia. I congratulate her government and electoral authorities for providing guarantees, which led to a successful election wherein the results were clear and citizens were able to exercise their rights. We hope that the votes cast by the people will be translated into clear outcomes in the future. The results of the election were followed very closely by various international observers, including the OAS Electoral Observation Mission. We believe that democracy is the only way forward for respect amongst our peoples, and we congratulate Luis Arce on his victory. Our president also congratulates him and salutes the Bolivian people on their ability to exercise their right to vote. The Foreign Minister of Ecuador spoke recently before the OAS and also wishes the new government the greatest success. I would also like to use this opportunity to say hello to Jaime Alonso Aparicio Otero, who is saying farewell to the OAS today. And I'd like to wish him the very best in his future endeavors. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for those comments, Ambassador. The Chair would like to recognize Deputy Permanent Representative from the United States, Brad.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. As Secretary Pompeo said regarding Bolivia's October 18th elections, we recognize Supreme Electoral Tribunal President Salvador Romero and all of Bolivia's electoral authorities for overseeing this credible process, along with the hard work and peaceful conduct of Bolivian voters, political parties, civil society, and the security forces. Unquote. We commend also the role of the OAS election observation mission in facilitating a credible and orderly political process in spite of the significant logistical and health challenges presented by COVID-19. The OAS and its dedicated election experts deserve our thanks for their selfless commitment to advancing and supporting democracy in the Western Hemisphere. We're very pleased that Bolivia has conducted a free, fair, and peaceful election and democratic transition. We recognize that it is also critical to continue to uphold democratic norms and the rule of law to maintain Bolivia's democracy. We note Foreign Minister Longaric's concerns. In recognizing Bolivia's peaceful and credible electoral process, we also call on all Bolivian actors to respect political processes and the spirit of inclusive democracy in the post-electoral environment. Bolivia's governing institutions must fairly represent and serve Bolivians of all backgrounds. Thank you very much.
We thank the delegation of the United States and now offer the floor to Ambassador Otero of Venezuela.
Ambassador, your microphone is muted. Thank you very much. I would like to start off by greeting Ambassador Sidney Colley, who is presiding over this meeting today, as well as the Secretary General, Luis Almagro, and the Assistant Secretary General, Nestor Mendez. I would also like to avail myself of this opportunity to greet Ambassador Jaime Aparicio, whom we will bid farewell today and give a brotherly hug. I would also like to recognize Ambassador Karen Longovic and commend her on her work carrying out the delicate function that was granted to her. Chair, democracy does not exist if there is no respect for the rule of law, if there is no respect for the separation of government, respect for human rights, and a balanced exercise of power amongst the different institutions that run nations. There also has to be transparency on the part of those exercising power, and freedom of thought, freedom of the press, and freedom of speech must be exercised. It is for that reason that we are deeply concerned about the statement made by the Minister of Bolivia. The fact that a legislative assembly that was on its way out would make hasty decisions is deeply concerning. This is a legislative assembly that had been replaced by the Bolivian people. The Bolivian people had expressed the will to have different representatives at that point. That is not democracy. And it cast doubt about the legitimacy of Bolivian politics because it could create more persecution and revanchism than it could create reconciliation. I would also like to mention the important role that was played by the independent electoral observation missions, especially the OAS EOM. Perhaps we didn't all get the desired result from this year's October elections. But of course, the OAS electoral observation missions do not have any particular ideological line. Recently, Luis Arce was recognized as the victor of the elections that took place. The critiques made of the OAS electoral observation mission at that time were clearly baseless, as this mission has earned the respect of the entire world, just as it did before in difficult situations, such as the missions it carried out in Trinidad and Tobago and Guyana. This electoral observation mission is a source of pride for our organization, and the work that they do is especially important. I would like to conclude my remarks by drawing parallels with the situation in Venezuela. Whether we like the results of the Bolivian election or not, we do celebrate the fact that the Bolivian people were able to express their will, and that is what we want for Venezuela. We want elections to be held in line with international standards as they were in Bolivia. We want leaders to be chosen by the people and not imposed on the people by leaders. We want the electoral authority to be independent and respected. That is what we are asking for Venezuela. That is what we all celebrate in Bolivia. And we see this bias. We see a bias on the part of some countries where they feel that standards are appropriate for some countries, but when it comes to Venezuela, they would no longer be necessary. But we need what happened in Bolivia to happen in Venezuela. We need a full commitment from all parties involved to accept the result, whatever it may be. That is the essence of democracy. Regrettably, in Venezuela, we don't just have a usurper government that completely denies the Venezuelan people of their free will. But they also do nothing to prevent the fraudulent elections that have happened and the ones that are to come. Chair, once again, I would like to express my congratulations to the people of Bolivia, and I wish President Luis Arce the best. We would like to thank the electoral observation missions from the OAS and from other places, and we would like to thank the Foreign Minister of Bolivia for her presentation. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Ambassador, for those comments. I see no further requests for the floor. In that case, there being no further requests for the floor, I suggest that the Permanent Council take note of the presentation made by Her Excellency Karen Langaric Rodriguez, as well as comments made by delegations. There being no objection, it is so agreed. Agreed. Item 3 on our agenda for today is the presentation of the report of the electoral observation missions on the general elections held in Bolivia, pursuant to the request from the member state and the Secretary General contained in document CP/INF 8777/20 and CP/INF 8782/20, respectively. The report of the electoral observation missions in Bolivia was distributed to delegations as document CP/DOC.5656/20. By way of a formal note dated September 16, 2020, the General Secretariat of the Organization of American States received an invitation from the government of Bolivia to deploy an electoral observation mission to observe the October 18, 2020 general elections in that country. In this electoral process, Bolivia elected the President and Vice President of the Republic, senators, and deputies. The Chief of Mission, former Foreign Minister of Costa Rica, Manuel Gonzalez and Sanz, will deliver a summary of that report. Dr. Gonzalez, welcome to this Permanent Council meeting. You have the floor, sir.
Mr. Gonzalez, could you please activate your camera and your microphone? Perfect. Let's see if we can hear you. Ambassador Audrey Marks, Chair of the Permanent Council, Ambassador Cindy Colley, Vice Chair of the Permanent Council, Foreign Minister Karen Longovich, Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Plurinational State of Bolivia, Ambassador Jaime Alonso Aparicio, Representative of the Plurinational State of Bolivia to the OAS, Mr. Secretary General Luis Almagro, Mr. Assistant Secretary General Nestor Mendez, representatives of the member states and observer states of the OAS. The report being presented today contains the observations of the electoral observation missions deployed for the general elections in 2019, which were subsequently nullified, as well as for the elections that took place on October 18th in the plurinational state of Bolivia. The mission is pleased to say that the improvements from one election to the next have been considerable. The 2019 elections took place in a context characterized by a lack of trust in political parties and a lack of trust on the part of political parties and the citizens in the electoral authority. This led to a serious lack of equity, which resulted from the use of governmental propaganda by the former administration. The day of the elections, when 83.76% of the ballots had been reported, and the trend was showing that there would be a runoff, the electoral authority at that point arbitrarily decided to suspend transmission of the preliminary results through what is known as the TREP system, hiding nearly 6% of the ballots that had already been registered in the system and were not made public. It is important to remember that that pattern was consistent with 3 independent rapid counts, which included the OAS rapid count. When the TREP system was reactivated almost 24 hours later, with information that was processed with a lack of transparency, and with 95% of the votes verified, the new preliminary information gave candidate Evo Morales a victory in the first round. The suspension of the TRIP system and the lack of trust in the electoral authority led to widespread protests. In response to that, the government asked the OAS to perform an electoral integrity analysis on the elections in a binding manner. This analysis revealed intentional manipulation of the elections in two ways. First of all, in terms of the ballots, they were manipulated, filled out beforehand, and signatures from the table jury members were counterfeited. Also, in terms of the system, the source code was manipulated the day of the election without explanation. Data went to two hidden servers that were not controlled by the staff of the Supreme Electoral Tribunal. This made it possible for data to be manipulated and for ballots to be manipulated and replaced. After the manipulations detected, on November 23rd, 2019, the Legislative Assembly of the Plurinational State of Bolivia passed the exceptional and transitory law to hold general elections. This resolution completely nullified the 2019 elections as well as its results. At the same time, it ordered that TSE, that Supreme Electoral Tribunal officials, be removed from their posts, and it established a procedure for the selection of their replacements. The new members of the Electoral Tribunal face the challenge of setting up logistically complete elections to try to reverse the mistrust on the part of the citizens in the electoral authority. This scenario was worsened by the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, which forced the Supreme Electoral Tribunal to postpone elections 2 different times, as well as to change other activities related to the elections. Despite the serious challenges faced and the limited time frame for elections, the new Electoral Tribunal managed to hold a successful electoral process with significant improvements from what was observed in 2019. Some highlights of this are that the tribunal has made significant progress in implementing the recommendations formulated by the OAS's Electoral Observation Mission in 2019, which contributed significantly to improvements. Now I will speak briefly about some of the areas in which the process, or rather the progress, was more evident. The reports being presented today contain a complete analysis about both elections. They also contain information on electoral institutions, the resignation out of 3 of the 7 members of the Electoral Tribunal the year before the 2019 elections, and that the latter issue had significantly undermined the electoral authority, which had very low levels of trust on the part of the citizens as the 2019 elections approached. During the meetings held by the tribunal last year, members of the opposition expressed their concern. They did this because they understood that most of the members of the tribunal would respond to the wishes of the party in power at that time. For this electoral process, as was mentioned, new members of the Electoral Tribunal were nominated through a process in which all political parties took part. In the interviews carried out by the Electoral Observation Mission, it was found that beyond any criticism about specific decisions made by the highest electoral body, most inspectors were able to confirm the independent and professional ability of the members of the Electoral Tribunal. Those interviewed also said that, as the Electoral Observation Mission had recommended in 2019, The new composition of the Electoral Tribunal reflects greater political and social plurality in Bolivia. The mission highlights that the actions taken by the electoral authority during this election has been, without a doubt, more transparent. Unlike what happened last year, when the Electoral Tribunal allowed for hidden servers to be set up within the results transmission system, during these elections, there was no sign that any kind of illegal action was planned by the electoral authority to manipulate the result. In terms of the chain of custody, as was revealed by the electoral integrity analysis carried out in 2019, one of the weaknesses of the electoral process had been the extreme fragility of the chain of custody in the elections. The security forces neglected to support the transfer of sensitive materials, and there was a lack of protocols and monitoring to protect the ballots, undermine the process. But heading into 2020, this new issue was addressed by the Electoral Tribunal with the help of an OAS technical support team. Observations show that the court set up 31 protocols and instructions for the custody and storage of materials during the production, storage, and distribution phases. The mission further underscores that the implementation of these protocols on election day was, generally speaking, done properly. In terms of electoral patterns, in order to fulfill the mandate established in the exceptional and transitory law on the elections, for these elections in 2020, the tribunal set up a series of measures to improve the elections. The mission would state that, for the sake of transparency, multi-party tables were set up, as were technical laboratories, to ensure that political organizations, academia, and members of civil society could be more aware of sanitary activities carried out by the authorities to improve hygiene. Unlike what happened in 2020, the mission was able to verify that the electoral authority carried out appropriate security measures in the material production phase. They observed that the spaces devoted to producing sensitive and non-sensitive material were in fact guarded by security forces and by electoral tribunal committees. It was also verified that additional security measures were taken at the time that the voting ballots were printed and counted. The same applies for voting certificates, as well as working sheets. In conclusion, today, Bolivia has an independent electoral authority, and Bolivia held a more equal election. The result of this was a successful election day. While there still are opportunities for improvement, which are laid out in the report, or the reports in plural that are being presented today, the progress made must be underscored, as has been done historically in Bolivia and in the rest of the hemisphere. The OAS will continue to support Bolivia in strengthening its democratic institutions. The recommendations found in the reports being presented today will help to perfect future electoral processes. The organization's technical work has been and will been focused on the quality of elections and not on their outcomes. The content found in the reports presented by the electoral observation missions are a fair and accurate account of what happened on the ground. The mission would like to thank the Electoral Tribunal for inviting the mission to oversee the elections. It would also like to thank the government of Bolivia, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, representatives of political parties, the candidates, and the different representatives of civil society with whom it had the opportunity to meet. Lastly, we would like to thank the financial contributions made by the governments of Brazil, Canada, Chile, Spain, the United States of America, France, Italy, Japan, Morocco, Mexico, the Netherlands, Peru, the Dominican Republic, the United Kingdom, and Switzerland. Thank you very much.
On behalf of the Permanent Council, I wish to thank Dr. Manuel Gonzalez Sanz, Chief of this Electoral Observation Mission in Bolivia, for delivering his report today. I now offer the floor to delegations that would like to comment on this agenda item. The chair recognizes Ambassador Simas of Brazil.
Thank you, Chair. First and foremost, I would like to express special thanks and recognition to Manuel Gonzalez from Costa Rica for presenting the final report of the Electoral Observation Mission about the general elections held in Bolivia on October 18th, 2020. As was said, Brazil had the honor of contributing to that mission, just as it had helped to send the EOM and the audit mission to Bolivia in 2019. The report that was presented confirms that the October 18th elections were well organized and well executed, despite the various challenges faced due to the COVID-19 pandemic and the political situation in that country. The EOM report also recognizes the efforts made by the Bolivian electoral authorities, including the fact that they repaired structures that had been damaged or destroyed in the 2019 elections. Beyond the more specific measures taken to provide protection in the context of the pandemic, an important factor in these elections was specifically fulfillment of the recommendations contained in the EOM's 2019 report. Mr. Chair, the recommendations issued in the report being submitted today are comprehensive and provide more technical detail on different issues related to elections, such as organization, electoral registration, campaign financing, electoral justice, the political participation of women and indigenous peoples, voting from abroad, and freedom of expression. In terms of this last issue of freedom of expression, I would like to underscore the recommendations made about the importance of having clearly defined protocol beforehand on this issue, as well as a law on public information in the context of elections. Mr. Chair, earlier at this meeting, I had the opportunity to mention that Brazil commends the actions taken by the transitional government of Janine Áñez to set up these elections. We would also like to commend the electoral authorities of Bolivia for inviting the OAS to support the October 18th elections. the participation of the OAS's electoral observation missions, as well as missions from other independent authorities, were essential to establish justice, credibility, and transparency in these elections. It also helped to confirm that the outcome from the polls were an accurate expression of the will of the people. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Excellency. Ambassador Adset, you have the floor.
Very much, Mr. Chair, and I spoke a few minutes ago generally on the elections that took place in Bolivia, but I did want to speak a couple of minutes on the electoral observation mission that the OAS organized and sent. And first, let me begin with our thanks to Manuel Gonzalez of Costa Rica for leading this mission and for the report that was presented this morning. Canada was once again pleased to have provided support for an OAS electoral observation mission to Bolivia to help to monitor these latest successful elections. Very much welcome the findings of the OAS electoral observation mission report, and we appreciate the commitment of the organization to continue its collaboration with Bolivia towards strengthening of that country's democratic institutions. Canada believes the OAS has a key role in monitoring the integrity of elections and promoting democratic governance in our hemisphere, in keeping with our collective and ongoing commitments outlined in the Inter-American Democratic Charter. We will continue to support such important efforts in our region. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. I see no more requests for the floor, but I will be prepared to offer the floor to Dr. Sands if he has any final comments.
Thank you very much to the Vice Chair of the Permanent Council and everyone who is here at this meeting today. It was an honor for us to present this report, and we are very grateful for the support that we have received for these missions and the recognition extended to the OAS staff that participated in the EOMs. These observers were very much involved on the field, and it was an honor for us to take part in these processes, given the respect we have for democratic processes. Thank you very much, and a good day to you.
Thank you, sir. The chair suggests that the Permanent Council take note of the report of the Electoral Observation Mission in Bolivia, contained in document CP/doc DOC 5656/20. Congratulate the government and people of Bolivia on general elections held on October 18, 2020, and thank Dr. Manuel Gonzalez Sands, Chief of Missions, and the members of his team for their excellent work during the Electoral Observation Mission. There being no further observations on this item, it is agreed. We turn now to item 4 on our agenda, which is the presentation of the report of the Electoral Observation Mission on the elections held in Peru, pursuant to a request from the Secretary General contained in CP/INF 8782/20. The report of the Electoral Observation Mission in Peru was distributed to delegations as document CP/DOC 5659/20. By way of a formal note dated 9th October 2019, the General Secretariat of the Organization of American States received an invitation from the government of Peru to deploy an electoral observation mission to observe the January 26, 2020 special congressional elections in that country. In this electoral process, Peruvians elected 130 congressmen and women to complete the constitutional term of the dissolved Congress. The chief of mission, former Foreign Minister of Paraguay, Ambassador Eduardo Lozanga, will deliver a summary of the report that was distributed to delegations. Ambassador Lozanga, welcome to this Permanent Council. You have the floor, sir.
Good morning, and thank you very much, Ambassador Audrey Marks, Chair of the Permanent Council and Permanent Representative of Jamaica, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Peru, Vice Chair of the Permanent Council, Ambassador Sidney Colley, the Permanent Representative of Peru to the OAS, Ambassador Luis Almagro, Secretary General of the OAS, Ambassador Nestor Mendez, Assistant Secretary General, ambassadors, permanent representatives of the OAS. The special congressional elections were convened in September of 2019, following the dissolution of the Congress as decreed by the President Martin Vizcarra. This election was not scheduled in the electoral calendar. It was a major challenge to the efficiency and technical and human capacities of the electoral system in Peru. In this context, the EOM underscores the efforts undertaken by the three electoral bodies to hold the elections in less than 4 months. These elections were held as part of political and electoral reforms which had begun in the country in 2017. These changes had to do with registration of political parties, their financing, regulations of propaganda, participation of women, and internal organization of political parties. Now, not all of these reforms were carried out by the electoral process that occurred in 2020, but many recommendations were implemented, recommendations that were made by previous EOMs. And there was a commitment made to continue to strengthen the electoral system in Peru. In order to best use the time here, the EOM worked to help Peru in improving the electoral system. So I'll just mention the main findings and conclusions of the EOM for each of the main topics. The full document has already been distributed and can be found on the website of the Department for Electoral Cooperation and Observation. Political participation of women. In the preliminary report, the EOM recommended that the new Congress discuss gender parity and to implement this before 2031. The EOM recognizes the fact that in June of this year, Congress approved this measure on parity. And this will enter into effect for the general elections that will be held in 2021. Instruments to promote and protect electoral participation of women have also been strengthened in recent years. But despite this, violence and harassment against women continues. The EOM recommends setting up a specific legal framework that will make it possible to address, prevent, and punish political violence based on gender, both during elections and outside of elections. Participation of Indigenous peoples and people of African descent. The EOM observed that Indigenous peoples are not always able to self-identify as such, and the same holds true for people of African descent. It is necessary for this to be addressed so that there can be full participation of Indigenous peoples in democratic processes. The EOM also notes that there are plans to promote an intercultural focus in upcoming elections. Campaigns were also carried out to provide information about the election process in Indigenous languages. However, even though in various districts and provinces there are official languages, many of the voting materials were only available in Spanish. It is recommended that in the near future, all voting materials be translated into the official languages of each region. Electoral organization. This was a special election, and the mission observed that despite the fact that there was not much time to register to vote on the electoral registers, measures were taken to publish these electoral registers. The EOM suggests evaluating the possibility of addressing the timelines established for regular elections and address when the voter registration registers be closed. There also need to be incentives for poll workers. There were delays in opening polling stations, and we reiterate the recommendation for poll workers to follow the timetables for opening polling stations. And the principal members shouldn't have to be the only ones that open the polling stations. This should also be extended to alternate poll workers and poll workers taken from the lines. When we compare the results of this election to other elections, there were a large number of nullified votes. The EOM believes that this should be analyzed further, and initiatives must be taken to reduce the possibility of voters committing errors on their ballots. The EOM also notes that during this election, audits were not carried out for electronic voting. In the interest of providing greater trust for all actors involved in the election process, the EOM reiterates its recommendation and the OAS recommendation from 2018 to include in the rules the requirement to carry out audits of all systems during, before, and after the elections. Guarantees must also be provided so that resources are provided in a timely manner in order for these oversight exercises to be carried out. The EOM also noted other aspects of these special elections. which was also observed by the OAS in 2014 and 2018. It is important to note that the jury members in recent years presented 3 bills on election processes. However, these have not been addressed by the Congress. The EOM reiterates its recommendation to address these issues in the Electoral Code. Despite the fact that special elections are provided for in Peruvian law, there are not sufficient regulations regarding these special elections. This issue must be addressed, and the National Electoral Board needs to address this issue. And definitively state which rules should apply to special congressional elections. The EOM recommends establishing either in the Constitution or in other laws clear rules governing general elections and also special elections. The EOM was informed that about 400 of the candidates that originally wished to run were excluded because there was false information in their curriculum vitae. Some of these were excluded due to other irregularities and some people resigned. The EOM saw that there was a great deal of uncertainty due to the exclusion of these candidates, and this affected both the population, the voters, and the candidates themselves. This is a cause of concern for the EOM and for other EOMs. It directly affects the political rights of the candidates and citizens as a whole. The EOM recommends implementing measures to address possible violations of the fundamental rights of individuals and to establish reasonable timelines during the phase in which candidates can be excluded. This must be done in a way that does not violate any rights. And if such rights are violated, then restitution must be taken immediately. Political parties are able to receive funds from private individuals. The EOM noticed that even though there are ceilings and caps on these individual contributions, there are not clear regulations on these. Therefore, it is recommended that a cap be established for contributions from private individuals. It was also observed that candidates must report their income during the 2-week period following the elections. These reports should also be received during the election period itself. Finally, the EOM would like to thank the government of Peru for allowing us to observe the election. We are also grateful for the support from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the openness of electoral authorities, including the National Electoral Board and other election entities. Their cooperation and that of the Peruvian people made it possible for experts to carry out their work. The mission The EOM is also grateful for donations from Bolivia, South Korea, the United States, France, Guatemala, Morocco, and the Netherlands. These funds allowed the EOM to carry out its work. Finally, I would like to thank the Secretary General, Luis Almagro, for the trust he placed in me in my role as Chief of the EOM. I would also like to congratulate the Director of DECO for the great professionalism displayed in carrying out these duties. Again, we express our commitment to strengthening democracy in the inter-American system. Thank you very much, Chair.
On behalf of the Permanent Council, I wish to thank Ambassador Lanza, Chief of this Electoral Observation Mission in Peru, for delivering his report. I now offer the floor to delegations who would like to comment on this report, beginning with Ambassador Zabalos from Peru.
Can you hear me? Thank you. Vice Chair, Secretary General, Assistant Secretary General, colleagues, ambassadors, good morning. At the outset, I would like to thank Ambassador Eladio Loizada for his work in the EOM to my country, which observed the special congressional elections. I'd also like to use this opportunity to recognize the work of the staff of DECO of the OAS, led by the director. The EOMs play a key role in the region. They monitor the necessary conditions for strengthening the rule of law and exercising civil and political rights in our countries. We know that this was an exceptional circumstance that my country experienced. On September 30th of 2019, our president, Martín Vizcarra, dissolved the Congress. And according to the Constitution, elections had to be held very soon thereafter. These elections were held on January 26th of this year. The new Congress, the 130 members of Congress, 4 of which were members who were reelected from the previous Congress, took office in March and are fully active. The process took place with great transparency, as noted by the EOM. The EOMs play a role which show that the OAS can make considerable contributions to democracy in our countries. These missions also demonstrate the way in which the inter-American system can strengthen democracy in our countries. Traditionally, my country has asked for EOMs to accompany our elections. In addition to the special congressional elections that we've spoken on during this session, the final report of the EOM states that the outcomes of the elections reflected the will of the voters. And the report commends Peruvian authorities on their ability to organize these elections in a very short period of time. The EOM, led by Ambassador Eladio Loizada, enjoyed a great deal of cooperation on the part of our electoral system in Peru, which included a range of entities. In addition to those connected to political parties, and this made it possible for the EOM experts to access all the information that they needed. With regard to the recommendations contained in the report, we believe that these will help Peru continue to improve its electoral system on issues such as electoral technology, political financing, political participation of women, indigenous peoples, and people of African descent, as well as electoral justice. Allow me also to make a few brief comments on what we have been implementing with regard to the EOM recommendations led by Ambassador Loizada. As noted by the ambassador, we have already approved a constitutional reform to modify elections. No less than 30% of the candidates must be women, and this amendment is going to apply to the general elections that will be held next year. This will allow for greater gender parity. Additionally, other entities are taking into account this rule on parity. Another constitutional amendment was approved in an initial phase, according to which any candidate that has a kind of criminal record is prevented from running for election. Another important measure has to do with political financing. We know that there is a great deal of corruption connected to politics in many of our countries, and this affects elections. There are two amendments I'd like to comment on specifically. The political contributions are being reviewed and audited not just after the election, but during the election itself. And ongoing monitoring must also take place according to the law. Regarding the other recommendations, and allow me to perhaps clear up a point of confusion. In 2019, in December, a constitutional referendum was held. And voters decided to not re-elect certain members of Congress, which led to a certain amount of uncertainty. So this meant no immediate re-election for some of the members of Congress who were part of the Congress who had been dissolved. Peru has always heeded the recommendations of the EOM. They are valuable and help us improve the system in our country. And it is no different for this EOM. The EOMs of the OAS are objective and have helped to strengthen democracy in many countries. We must ensure that these EOMs remain autonomous and independent. Vice Chair. In April of 2021, general elections will be held in Peru to elect the president, the vice president, and members of Congress for the 2021-2026 term. The the government has extended an invitation to the General Secretariat of the OAS to once again send an EOM to Peru during that time. I would like to thank the Secretary General for accepting that invitation. We believe that the presence of the EOM will contribute to the great success of the election. Before I conclude my remarks, I would like to repeat my sincere thanks to the Department of Electoral Cooperation and Observation, and I also thank the many countries that made financial contributions that allowed for the EOM to carry out its work. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. The chair recognizes Ambassador Diaz of Paraguay. You have the floor.
Good morning to all. Mr. Vice Chair, thank you very much. Mr. Secretary General, Assistant Secretary General, colleagues, thank you. First and foremost, I would like to thank Ambassador Eladio Leizaga for his presentation. He is a wonderful person, and I got to work alongside him for several years. So I would be remiss if I did not take this opportunity to express my pride for the fact that he has led the OAS electoral observation mission. Very briefly, I would also just like to point out something historic. My country is amongst the first in the hemisphere to receive an electoral observation mission. That was in 1990 for our election that year, and at that time, Mr. Leizaga was involved in the process. He was able to carry out that mission at that time alongside our organization. Mr. Secretary, the fact that Paraguay was able to receive an electoral observation mission for the first time is something that makes us even further committed to the principles of the OAS Charter and the Inter-American Democratic Charter. We hope to continue down that road. Thank you very much and have a nice afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you, Excellency, for those comments. The chair recognizes Amanda Klaman from Canada.
Thank you very much, Chair. Canada wanted to commend Peru's electoral authorities for nimbly organizing the off-cycle congressional elections of January 26, 2020. And we also commend the Peruvian people for their very high level of participation in those elections. We appreciate the OAS EOM's focus on the participation of women, as well as Peru's diverse Indigenous and Afro-descendant populations in their report. And we encourage Peru to take these constructive recommendations on board for the upcoming general elections in 2021. And we're encouraged to hear that they have already started adopting some recommendations. Canada commends the approval specifically of parity and alternating positioning in party lists for the upcoming general elections and welcomes all reforms that allow for more inclusive elections. Congratulations and thank you very much.
We thank the delegation of Canada for those remarks and offer the floor to the USA, delegation of the USA.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On behalf of the delegation of the United States, I would like to take this opportunity to express our great appreciation for the presentation by Foreign Minister Gonzalez on the OAS mission to the elections in Bolivia, as well as for the report we've just heard from Foreign Minister Leizaga regarding his and his team's work in leading the electoral observation mission to Peru's legislative elections in January of this year. The United States greatly appreciates the work of the OAS Department of Electoral Cooperation and Observation, led by Secretary Francisco Guerrero and DECO Director Gerardo de Casa, as well as their entire teams. Their work and dedication
I think we lost connection with representative of USA.
support for the mission's nationalism amidst very trying circumstances.
Are there any chance that we will be able to reconnect? We can always come back to the delegation of the United States. Technical team, are there any chance you can get him back?
Let's see if he requests the floor again.
Okay. In the meantime,
he's requesting now.
Yes. Brad, you have the floor.
Thank you, Ambassador Colley. I'm not sure where you lost me. And
we only got the first 2 or 3 sentences.
Repeat everything.
Repeat. You can repeat.
Okay. Thank you for your indulgence. We wish to thank and express our appreciation for both of the presentations today. First by Foreign Minister Gonzalez on the OAS mission to the election in Bolivia, as well as to Foreign Minister Loizaga regarding his team's work in leading the electoral observation mission to Peru's legislative elections in January. The United States deeply appreciates the work of the OAS Electoral Cooperation and Observation Mission Department, led by the Secretary for Strengthening Democracy, Francisco Guerrero, and DECO Director Gerardo de Casa, as well as their entire teams. Their work and dedication upholds this most vital of functions, and their tremendous record of achievement must be recognized by all of us who care and appreciate our fundamental commitment to the promotion and defense of democracy in the Americas. To say that OAS missions have exceeded expectations this year would be an understatement. We take this opportunity to reaffirm the United States' support for these missions' extraordinary work and professionalism amid difficult circumstances. Despite the pandemic, the OAS worked to make possible effective electoral observation in Suriname, Guyana, the Dominican Republic, Peru, Bolivia, and other countries. We commend the extraordinary dedication of the OAS teams and the host governments who worked closely with the OAS to enable these efforts. Coming in advance of the 20th anniversary of the adoption of the Inter-American Democratic Charter, the ongoing mandate of the OAS in electoral observation remains more relevant and needed than ever. On a final note, on behalf of my government, I wish to take this opportunity to thank and welcome the presence of the OAS Electoral Observation Mission to our general elections here in the United States. We greatly appreciate the work and dedication they are currently carrying out as our democratic process unfolds. An election in which historic numbers of Americans have taken to the polls. And we greatly appreciate seeing their presence at polling stations in Maryland, Iowa, Michigan, Georgia, as well as the District of Columbia. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for your for your patience, and thank you to all for your continuing support for this important function.
We thank the delegation of the United States for those remarks. I do not see any further requests for the floor, but I will give Ambassador Lozaga an opportunity for any final comments.
Muchas gracias, señor vicepresidente. Solamente reiterar el agradecimiento de toda la misión.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice Chair. I would just like to thank the government of Peru, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and the electoral authorities who, all throughout the process, helped us in the process and opened the door to us so that we could have meetings at every level of government. They provided. I would also like to highlight the technical know-how of the mission. And as the ambassador from Paraguay highlighted, in the year 1990, this process began in Paraguay, and since then we have been working to consolidate this process and obtain greater support for it. It is one of the highest priorities for the Secretary General, Mr. Luis Almagro, and we fully support him in that vision. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Excellency. I thank the delegations for their comments. The Chair suggests that the Permanent Council take note of the report of the Electoral Observation Mission in Peru, contained in document CP/Doc 5659/20. Congratulate the government and people of Peru on their special congressional elections held on January 26, 2020, and thank Ambassador Eladio Lonzaga, Chief of Missions, and the members of his team for their excellent work during the Electoral Observation Mission. There being no further observations on this item, it is agreed. Agreed. We will now proceed to the next item on the order of business for today, which is the presentation of the report, Observatory for Democracy and Integral Development in the Americas, pursuant to the requests from the Secretary General contained in document CP/INF 8779/20. In this regard, I am pleased to offer the floor to Mr. Rodolfo Pisa, Coordinator for the Observatory Project. Mr. Pisa, you have the floor.
Chair, thank you very much. Foreign Ministers, Mr. Secretary General Luis Almagro, Assistant Secretary General Nestor Mendez, I would like to extend a warm greeting to all Chiefs of Mission and all permanent representatives of the Permanent Council. For the first time, I will present the initial report on the Observatory for Democracy. You should be able to see it on your screen. It seems that there is a problem here. Let's see what happened. Once again, I will try to put it up on the screen. I'm trying to share my screen, and I apologize for this. Thank you very much once again. The Observatory for Democracy and Integral Development in the Americas provides support to the Secretary General and the member states. Let's talk about what the observatory is not. It is not a judge. It is not a commissioner. It is not a quasi-judicial body. It does not make decisions and it does not intervene. Second of all, it is not an academic institute. It takes advantage of academic studies already done, as well as theoretical studies on democratic indicators, but in and of itself, it is not an academic institute. It is not an electoral body. That function is very well fulfilled by the electoral observation missions, and that is the way it has been for quite some time with great success. Well, what is it? It is, in fact, a tool that provides the OAS and the states with tools and services. Second of all, it is an institutionalized and organized mechanism to compile information on indicators. And third, it is an advisory body that provides technical advisory services to prevent risks. And it works at the service of the General Secretariat and the states. Now let's talk about its parameters. First of all, the OAS Charter, the Inter-American Democratic Charter, which soon will celebrate its 20th anniversary, among others. The indicators used can be broken up into three main groups: the ones that are essential, that is, the core group of indicators on democracy, essentially Article 3 of the Inter-American Democratic Charter, and indicators that are common amongst the constitutions of all of our organization's members. That is the lowest common denominator of all of our constitutions. Then there are other favorable and important indicators that we will talk about. How are these indicators chosen? Well, first of all, there are those that are taken from the Inter-American Democratic Charter. The ones that are generally used by most observatories outside of the context of the OAS, and the ones that are viable to obtain. Of course, the observatory's origins really go back to the preamble of the Inter-American Democratic Charter, which called for ongoing efforts to prevent the causes of problems that affect democracies. There is a Permanent Council resolution from December 14th, 2011, which is adamant about the need to create a system to draw a periodic report on the status of democracy in the region, an early alert system, and support the countries in their efforts to strengthen their democratic institutions. Of course, the goal is also to support the General Secretariat in these functions. The observatory also goes back to a SAPEM study from 2011, which once again calls for the need to have this. And then there was a 2018 report from the Inter-American Dialogue, which once again is adamant about the need to have this observatory. There are several other Permanent Council resolutions that point in the same line, and these come from many years back. Now, what are the parameters for democracy? There are three basic elements. First of all, free, periodic, fair elections. 2, human rights. 3, rule of law and division of powers. Those are the three essential components taken out of Article 3 of the Inter-American Democratic Charter. These also overlap with the definition about lowest common denominators from member states' constitutions, as I said. It's not a maximalist definition. Democracy doesn't go in that line. It doesn't favor progress and equality and well-being, although it could allow for greater progress in these areas. It's not a minimalist declaration either. It's not just about elections. It's not just about seeking legitimacy in elections. The minimalist version of this would just be that the definition of democracy would be that there is an electoral process. It does go beyond that. The Western Hemisphere is predominantly democratic based on all of our indicators most citizens in the hemisphere are citizens of democracies. In the Freedom House report, it says that only 9% of countries would not be qualified as democratic or free, and only 4% of the inhabitants of our hemisphere would fall into that category of not living in a democracy. In the IDEA report, it said that more than 90% of countries do qualify as democracies. Two do not qualify as democracies under that criteria, and then there are 2 hybrid regimes. Of course, we have seen a very significant change since 1976, when there are 16 dictatorships and 5 democracies. The IDEA report does not include most Caribbean countries, but now there are 33 countries that are not authoritarian, which obviously includes the Caribbean countries, the United States, and Canada. These are not authoritarian countries according to the IDEA report. Also, according to studies by the World Bank and ECLAC, we have seen that there has been positive evolution in the fight against poverty, in addition to just the transition from dictatorships to democracy. In Latin America and the Caribbean, we don't include Canada or the United States, and the figure for that is 30%. That's the poverty rate. But in either case, from the World Bank or from ECLAC, from their information, we can see that poverty has gone down by more than 50% from the 1930s. It depends on the parameter you use, but in any case, we do envision rising poverty during the COVID-19 crisis, but of course we will still have less poverty than we did before the time of high democracy. We see 23 countries with middle income. More than 95% of the inhabitants in the hemisphere do live in places with high or very high human development. That's 28 countries, 7 in very high and 21 in high countries. The only significant decline in indicators that we've seen over the last 10 years takes place in one country, and that is Venezuela. Of course, there are other countries that have stagnated in their human development processes. As you can see, there is a relationship between democracy and human development. The 7 most democratic countries are also the 7 countries with the highest levels of human development. Just the same, the countries with the lowest levels of democratic development tend to have less democracy tend to have less human development. There are certain exceptions to that, and we won't go into that right now. And here in this figure, we have some data on countries in the Caribbean and CARICOM. If we look at the most democratic countries, they also tend to have fewer people living in poverty. Here we see data from ECLAC and the World Bank with their averages, and we put them together to unify that figure. Of course, you have the most democratic countries that have the lowest levels of poverty. In terms of the average democracy rating, this also is correlated with gender equality. There are some exceptions to this, but generally the trend can be seen in our graphs in blue and orange. Generally speaking, this gender equality figure comes from the United Nations. Most countries that have high democracy ratings are between 20 and 30% on this graph that you can see here. That includes Chile, the United States, Canada, and Panama. And there are certain other countries that do have slightly lower ratings that you can see on the graph that have higher levels of representation. There are some exceptions to that. So we can't say that there is a defining parameter there that would allow us to declare a clear relationship between gender equality and democratic ratings. There's also a positive correlation between democracy and having a large middle class. Generally, the middle class, as measured by ECLAC with 2007 figures, as seen by this line, show that the higher the level of democracy, the higher the percentage of people that live in the middle class. ECLAC prefers the term mid-level stratus as opposed to middle class. Now, in terms of the Gini indicator, there is no direct correlation. There are many exceptions to this. There are countries that have a high Gini indicator and no democracy, and there are countries with poor scores on the Gini equality indicator and have high levels of democracy. In fact, there are some countries that have excellent Gini coefficients, like Niger, for example. It has one of the highest Gini indicators, but it is not a democracy. And it is actually the country with the lowest level of human development in the world, so there is no clear relationship. However, according to the IDB, there is a direct correlation between having a solid democracy and having a solid distribution network. We're not talking about distribution like of photographies. We're talking about the redistribution of wealth. There is more of a tendency for wealth to be redistributed more in countries that have high democracy than in countries that have low democracy rankings. The average democracy rating also shows us that there is a relationship between that and transparency. There is an inverse relationship with the perception of transparency based on Transparency International. There are some exceptions to this, but generally speaking, there is a clear correlation there. Despite that, there is no relationship between democracy and number of homicides per 100,000 inhabitants, according to 2018 data on this. There are countries that are highly democratic that also have high levels of crime. There are also very democratic countries that have very low levels of crime. There isn't such a direct relationship there between the two things as we see with other parameters. What we do see is that the 5 countries with the highest democracy rankings based on the average indicator have a much higher per capita income to the 5 lowest countries. And there we can break things down into 4 groups. You can see that there is group 1, which are the countries with the most democracy and have the highest level of per capita income. And then you have the lowest level democratic countries, and they have the lowest level per capita income. There are some different causes in the report discussed, but we can in any case see that there is a relationship there. Not necessarily causality, but there is a correlation. Here we can also see that the per capita income in Venezuela is debatable because the last data we got was from 2014 and not from 2019 as the data that we got from other countries. However, in any case, there's a clear relationship between having a higher democratic ranking and having higher per capita income. Of course, the price of commodities has a large impact on this. Between 1990 and 2002, there was little economic growth and little social improvement as well. Poverty did not go down much at all. And this essentially coincides with the time when commodities prices were flat. But then from 2002 to 2008, when commodities prices spike, almost all countries in the hemisphere, virtually all commodity exporting countries, at least, be they hydrocarbons, agricultural products, or minerals, saw significant improvements in social development and economic indicators. We also see a decline just for 1 year, and then it starts to recover, and this is maintained until 2014. After 2014, we see a drop and then stagnation. And obviously now in 2020, we will see a drop. There is a very direct relationship between social indicators, economic indicators, and commodities prices. It doesn't matter what ideology countries had from 2002 to 2008, poverty went down, their economic policies didn't matter. The countries that export those kinds of commodities saw improvement during that time. So there was a very direct relationship between commodity prices and economic situations. There is also a relationship between economic freedom and democracy. We used an average from 4 different sources, which include the World Bank and other organizations like the Doing Business Report, as well as the Competitiveness Index. There is quite a direct relationship between these two criteria. And in the case of the Caribbean, they only use the Doing Business Report because it has the information on that area, and Freedom House because the other sources didn't give such clear information on that. We did see fragility and some progress. In other words, support for democracy has weakened. There are high rates of discrimination in some countries. We have seen little economic growth in recent years. And that's without taking into account the effects of the pandemic. Middle classes have grown, but they have felt affected by everything that's happened, and they haven't grown that much. Poverty, although it has gone down, we saw it went down from 50% to 30%, but despite that, through 2019, many countries, or some countries, still did not feel the benefits of that drop, or they hadn't felt it enough. There are, of course, many distinctions. There are countries that have over 50% poverty rates, and there are countries that have less than 5% poverty.
Tienen menos de 10% pobreza.
It's generally less than 10% for the wealthier countries. In terms of distribution of wealth, that has also improved over the past 20 years. The Gini coefficient is more equitable than it was 20 years ago, but it continues to be a region with high levels of poor wealth distribution. We also see labor informality in many countries. In some countries, it's over 50%. This is in over 10 countries, and this has other impacts as well. We can also see the impact of the COVID-19 crisis. Between 2000 and 2005, we see an increase and then a slight drop. This is the varieties of democracy. This reflects what we've been talking about already. We can also see this in the Economist and the ratings for the democracy index. Between 2010 and 2019, there have been declines in some countries, but in general, the ratings have remained largely the same. And some have even improved, except, as you know, for Venezuela, which experienced a decline of 50%. In terms of dissatisfaction with democracy, that has increased according to a study done by Cambridge University in the UK. Here we have the levels of dissatisfaction. We see an increase, a decline, and then another increase in dissatisfaction. In the Caribbean, it was largely stable, but we have seen a rise in dissatisfaction more recently in Caribbean countries as well. Again, the Caribbean is mainly CARICOM. Looking at another barometer on support for democracy, we see an increase in indifference to the type of governance system. This was also noted by America's Barometer in 2018, 2019. there was a drop in average support for democracy. However, there is still a majority support for democracy in the hemisphere. There's also a link between support for democracy and satisfaction with democracy, though in general support is higher than the level of satisfaction, even though, again, this comes from America's Barometer, but it's a very similar situation to the one described by Pew and other data sources. There's also a relationship between support for democracy and the democracy rating. We see greater support for countries with higher rankings, but also great support for countries with the lowest rankings. Here we can see a curve. If you look at the graph, a U-shaped curve. There are several countries where a high percentage of the population would support a coup if there is high corruption or crime. On the left, you see the rankings on corruption, and on the right, you see the levels of crime. Regarding the Inter-American Democratic Charter, it has been recognized or invoked by the ICHR, the court, and member states. This is important to note. Because of the legal standing of this charter and the way in which it is used. Here you see the 5 parameters, which can be noted here: free elections, transparent elections, 2, the rule of law, and 3, human rights. These are the 3 elements. There is a relationship between democracy and the balance between the power of the majority and the rights of minorities. In an ideal democracy, you have the strength of the majority, but also power of the minority. There is a good balance in an ideal democracy. According to the Charter, democracy is defined as having a few of the basic elements that I noted earlier. There are minimum rules, but there is no magic recipe or one-size-fits-all. There can be parliamentary systems or presidential systems or mixed systems. Those can all be democracies. There can be different legal systems in democracies. Electoral systems may differ as well. First past the post, or proportional systems, or mixed systems. There may be strong market economies in some democracies and not in others. But all need to have a minimum level of well-being in order to be considered democracies, but there is no standard definition of what kind of economic system a democracy needs to have. There are different levels of human development. Some democracies have low levels, others have high levels. Generally, it's higher in most democracies, but this is not a requirement. There are also large countries that are democracies and small countries, both in terms of land and population. Many of the largest countries are in our hemisphere. But some of these countries are some of the smallest. The OAS Charter recognizes representative democracy. Here are the main sources of data that I've mentioned: Freedom House, Varieties of Democracy, which is from Sweden. And then you have Latino Barometro, America's Barometer, and a center at the University of Cambridge, the Bennett Institute. These are the main indices, but there are other ones that address more specific topics. Many come from the UN and other entities, and others talk about equality and human rights. There are other sources that we have indicated here too. There is also a relationship between electoral processes. I'm going through this a little bit more quickly now. So the relationship between electoral processes and civil rights. When you have free electoral processes, you often have countries where there is greater enjoyment of civil rights. The same holds true for the rule of law. For the most part, there is a direct relationship between the rule of law, human rights, and electoral processes. There are other important elements. These would be elections, respect for fundamental rights and civil liberties, among others. These determine a democracy's ability to face risks. There's also political participation, equity, fighting corruption, governance, and there are other elements too, favorable or unfavorable, that could have a link to potential risks when there are violent conflicts and political instability. There isn't necessarily a democratic breakdown in those cases, but warnings should be issued for those instances. There are other indicators that can be summarized in these tables that I'm showing here. Countries in red have lower rankings, and those in green have better rankings. But in no country is democracy at 100% or 0%. There are risks, obviously, in terms of governance, the relationships between minorities and majorities. If the population perceives that elections serve no purpose and do not reflect the will of the people, that can lead to a loss of democracy. There's also the issue of populism. If you look at the relationship between populism and democracy, there is one as well. But populist rhetoric is not necessarily contrary to democracy. Social demonstrations also indicate opportunities for improvement. They can constitute risks as well. We tend to see greater support for democracy among youth. And there tends to be a difference between support for democracy between youth and older individuals. Democracies also need a middle class. It's members of the middle class that tend to sustain democracies generally. This can be seen in surveys carried out on support for democracy. Middle classes tend to have more support for democracy, or in any case, they're less indifferent. When we talk about distribution of wealth, that's not necessarily a requirement for democracy, but poor distribution of wealth does not help a democracy. There's never absolute equality, but there needs to be a minimum level of equality, socially and economically speaking. Another important point is the balance between various types of economies. The words in red are used by the Inter-American Democratic Charter and the Social Charter of the Americas. And these would be, I apologize also for taking up so much of your time today, but other important conditions, or rather important elements, are historic conditions of a democracy, the importance of the middle class, insecurity and corruption, increase discontent with democracy, and in some countries, these would be a justification for a coup. There's also the importance of free elections, again, the importance of the middle class and fighting poverty, and also maintaining enough support for democracy. Governance is also important. Elected authorities and satisfaction with elected authorities play an important role. There's also the idea that decisions should be made, and voting makes that possible. Another important point is that any democracy can fall. Even an economically prosperous country that has a long-standing democracy could experience a drop in its democracy. Democracies require gradual change, not sudden change. This was something we could see in countries, especially in Latin America, in the 1970s. Democracies don't really allow for radical changes when it comes to various types of policies, economic policies, austerity policies, social policies. There are many historic examples that we could think of here. Populist rhetoric doesn't necessarily help or hurt democracy. Democracies can withstand or live with this type of rhetoric, but close attention should be paid to actions, not words quite as much. This is also something that we can see throughout history, especially during periods between wars in the 1920s. In the 20th century, rather, we saw many people take to the streets. We saw fascist groups rise between World War I and World War II in Germany and Italy, taking to the streets in this way is not necessarily a path to democracy. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't have protests or demonstrations, but taking to the streets in that manner is not necessarily the best way forward for a democracy. That is the end of my presentation, and I am happy to answer any questions that you may have. I do apologize for the length of the presentation as well. Thank you.
He terminado, no sé si...
That is the end of my presentation. Thank you.
I thank Mr. Pisa for his presentation. At this juncture, it is my pleasure to turn the meeting over to the chair of the Permanent Council, Ambassador Marks. Ambassador Marks, it's all yours.
You're on mute,
You're on
Ambassador.
mute, Ambassador.
I think second time around. Thank you so much, Mr. Vice Chair, Ambassador Colley. My sincere appreciation for your stewardship during my absence. I will thank Mr. Pisa for your presentation, and I now offer the floor to delegations. There be no request for the floor. I suggest that the Permanent Council take note of the presentation made today by the coordinator of the observatory, Mr. Rodolfo Pisa, and the comment make note of his comments. There be no objections. It is so agreed. Agreed. The next item on the agenda corresponds to the recognition of the Intersex Awareness Day. In response to the request of the Permanent Mission of Brazil as coordinator of the OAS LGBTI core group, contained in document CP/INF 8786/20. In this regard, I'm pleased to offer the floor to the delegation of Brazil. The distinguished representative of Brazil, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Chair. First and foremost, I would like to thank the OAS for including this item about Intersex Day held on October 26th. And I'm thrilled that this will be addressed on today's Permanent Council agenda. The LGBTIQ core group has been coordinated for this purpose, and Brazil is proud to make a joint statement referring to Intersex Day. I will now proceed to read this statement in Spanish. The LGBTIQ core group at the OAS and its members, Argentina, Canada, Chile, Colombia, Costa Rica, Ecuador, El Salvador, the United States, Mexico, and Uruguay, celebrate Intersex Visibility Day held on October 26th by making a call to all member states to put an end to all forms of violence and discrimination against the intersex population. As has been documented by international human rights organizations, intersex individuals are affected by violence, discrimination, and other violations of their human rights motivated by prejudice, stereotype, and general ignorance about their sexual characteristics and their needs. One of the most serious consequences of the violation of this population's rights is related to health. This can include surgical interventions and unnecessary medical treatments without their free and informed consent. We would also like to mention that the OAS's 50th regular session of the General Assembly had an omnibus resolution that took note of the specific abuses often suffered by intersex individuals, which may involve unreversible sex designation, surgeries, and genital changes without informal consent, as well as sterilization, delays in birth registry, among other things. Additionally, this omnibus resolution urged member states to adopt measures to ensure effective protection for intersex individuals and to implement policies and procedures as needed to ensure that medical practices related to intersex individuals are in line with human rights. The member states of the OAS LGBTIQ core group reaffirm their commitment to defend the human rights of all people, regardless of their sexual orientation, gender identity, or sexual traits. And they will do this in accordance with their laws and national policies, as well as applicable international human rights law, with the purpose of strengthening inclusive and democratic societies. End quote. Thank you very much for your attention, Chair.
Thank you, distinguished representative of Brazil. I now offer the floor to delegations. There will be no request for the floor. I suggest that the Permanent Council take note of the joint declaration of the member countries of the OAS LGBTI core group, read by the distinguished delegation of Brazil as coordinator of the core group. There be no objections. It is so agreed. Item 7. Let us now proceed to the next item in our order of business with the adoption of the following minutes. CP/ACTA 2236, the regular meeting of the Permanent Council of June 19th, 2019. Second, CP/ACTA 2238, regular meeting of the Permanent Council of July 17th, 2019. CP/ACTA 2239, special meeting of the Permanent Council of July 18th, 2019. CP/ACTA 2241, regular meeting of the Permanent Council of July 24th, 2019. If there are no comments, we'll proceed to its approval. It is approved. Our next agenda item, item 8, is a farewell to Ambassador Jaime Alonso Otero, permanent representative of the plurinational state of Bolivia. Ambassador Otero presented his letters of credentials to the Secretary General on January 14, 2020. During his tenure as permanent representative of the state of Bolivia to the Organization of American States, Ambassador served as Vice Chair of the Permanent Council and the General Committee from January to March 2020. Ambassador Aparicio has a distinguished professional and academic career, both nationally and internationally. Prior to being appointed as permanent representative to the OAS, Ambassador Aparicio worked on issues related to democracy, human rights, and international law in Latin America. He held the positions of Undersecretary and Acting Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs of Bolivia. From 2002 to 2006, he was Ambassador of Bolivia to the United States. He also served as President of the Inter-American Juridical Committee of the OAS, as well as the Executive Secretary of the Summits of the Americas. In addition, he led several missions to the General Assembly of the United Nations, UNESCO, and the OAS. During his tenure at the OAS, Ambassador Aparicio has showed diplomatic acumen, character, strong principles, and intelligence. This council benefited from his experience and knowledge. I now offer the floor to the coordinators of the regional groups. We will offer the floor to the coordinator of the Aladi group.
Colombia is requesting the floor, Madam Chairman. Excuse me.
I'm not able to see. It's not, the request screen is not coming up. I now offer the floor to the delegation of Colombia.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. Jaime, I am speaking on behalf of the members of the ALADE group, that is Brazil, Chile, Ecuador, Paraguay, Peru, Uruguay, Venezuela, and Colombia. I speak on behalf of these members to thank you for your work representing Bolivia with the utmost skill. We would also like to recognize the work that you did for all to strengthen democracy, uphold human rights, uphold multidimensional security, and promote integral development in the region. I will confess that it is not easy to say goodbye to a friend, especially a friend with whom I worked on many different challenges and concerns over the course of many days. Challenges to the region and the inter-American system. And I'm not just talking about the episodes that Bolivian democracy went through recently and that are well known and that were analyzed in depth by this committee. Instead, I am talking about ongoing tensions that must be faced in the exercise of these delicate diplomatic duties. Your timely interventions to strengthen the inter-American system and to fend off the risks of any kind of loss of credibility leave us much to think about over the next few years. Your valuable contributions to discussions at the last General Assembly about resolutions to improve and to pass were enriching and will continue to define paths in our work at this organization. Your enthusiastic support during the events that ended with the re-election of the Secretary General allowed that process to take place in unison and without any major setbacks. We would also like to thank you for the efforts that you and your government made to fulfill the mandate of convening and carrying out the October elections in a scenario of peace, democratic assurances, and peaceful coexistence. Your work to defend the common good for Bolivians and the people of all of the Americas will be remembered by this permanent council. And we will continue to fight for this as we work from our computers as what we now call the new normal. Jaime, you should know that the people from our generation, and a large part of ambassadors here are of that generation, will have to work with technology in different days, and this makes us nostalgic for the old days when we would meet in person. Today, I know that my colleagues will agree with me when I say that I wish that we were in our traditional headquarters so that I could give you a hug and wish you the utmost success in the new challenges that you will face. Due to political circumstances, we are facing unpredictable scenarios. We don't know if in the future we will cross paths again. However, in the months that we spent together, you proved yourself to be a wise diplomat with the strength to defend what you believe in without undermining the Bolivian interests that you represented. Well, you showed respect for anybody that may disagree with you. My dear friend and ambassador, that work is what we will remember. And be it in Bolivia or wherever you are, that will continue to be your legacy. On behalf of the Alati Group, I would like to say farewell and reiterate to you that it was a privilege to spend time with a man of principles that always acted based on those. I send you a warm virtual hug.
You're on mute, Madam Chair.
This thing is okay.
Okay.
Yes, thank you. We thank a distinguished representative of Colombia. We'll now offer the floor to the distinguished representative of Canada.
Madam Chair, it's a pleasure to see you this morning. And let me start, maybe if I could, just picking up on some of the last words of the distinguished ambassador of Colombia, to also say how much nostalgia I feel for when we could meet together to say goodbye to our colleagues. So I'll make up for that, like him, by sending a bit of a virtual hug this morning as we say farewell to our friend and colleague, Ambassador Jaime Aparicio. I think you said it very well. You sum up his background, his work as a distinguished lawyer, a distinguished diplomat, somebody who's been very engaged in the past and in the present on issues of human rights and on democracy and on the rule of law. But I noticed something as well, too. Ambassador Aparicio took on his responsibilities at a very difficult time in his country's history. And I want to acknowledge that and to acknowledge the efforts that he made consistently to present eloquently and directly on occasion his country's perspective and point of view on issues, but also his willingness to always engage with us and to engage with my delegation in dialogue and discussions and in exchanging points of view. On a delegation level, we appreciated that, and on a personal level, I appreciated that as well. So let me, with just a few words, say not only goodbye to Ambassador Aparicio, but Jaime, let me also wish you well with all that may come in the future, with whatever roads you may end up following, and offer my sincere best wishes and best of luck. Thank you.
As the distinguished representative of Guatemala. Guatemala, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. as this is the first time that I have spoken today. I would like to greet Ms. Karen Longovich, Foreign Minister of the Plurinational State of Bolivia, and thank her for her important presentation and her presence at this council to provide us a report on the successful elections held in her country under President Áñez in October. I would also like to greet the chiefs of the electoral observation missions in Bolivia and Peru, and I would like to commend them along with the Department of Electoral Cooperation for their work. I would also like to thank Mr. Rodolfo Pisa Rocafort for his presentation on the observatory and on integral development in the Americas. Chair. At this point on the agenda, the delegation of Guatemala is honored to take the floor to greet our friend and fellow diplomat, Jaime Aparicio, who bids us farewell from this council as an ambassador of the plurinational state of Bolivia to the OAS. On this occasion, I am pleased to remember the personal and professional qualities of Ambassador Aparicio that enriched the discussions at this council. He took advantage of his vast experience as a diplomat in his country and the United States and in different missions to the United Nations. I would also like to highlight his experience as a jurist and his work in international law, human rights, and the rule of law for more than 30 years. Also, in the inter-American arena, he has done important work as a member and chair of the Inter-American Juridical Committee. His political analyses are also widely consulted. Distinguished Ambassador, Guatemala bids you farewell, and we are sure that your commitment to democracy, the rule of law, peace, security, and the full application of human rights is unbreakable. This will be maintained over time, and we are sure that you will continue to work towards attaining your goals in your country and in the hemisphere. Ambassador, you can leave with the assurance that you have accomplished your mission. It was a pleasure to share our work to address different challenges with you. Please accept a warm hug from me and my wishes for your utmost success. Jaime, farewell.
Thank the distinguished Ambassador of Guatemala. And we now recognize the distinguished delegation of Haiti.
Madame la Présidente.
It is not always easy to say goodbye to a colleague like Ambassador Aparicio. An effective diplomat must develop relationships with representatives of other countries. That is something that Ambassador Aparicio was able to do during his exceptional time at the OAS. I always appreciated his wisdom and his desire to find lasting solutions. The Permanent Council was honored to have a diplomat like Ambassador Aparicio. We were always able to benefit from his measured statements and ideas. He served his country extremely well. The OAS was able to develop cooperation with Bolivia under the leadership of Ambassador Aparicio. The Haitian delegation would like to welcome the recent elections held in Bolivia and hopes that this example will be followed for its next elections. We would also like to express our appreciation and thanks to Ambassador Aparicio for all of the work that he has done so successfully and for the legacy that he will leave to the House of the Americas. I wish him the greatest success for the rest of his career. Thank you very much, and farewell, dear colleague.
We thank the distinguished ambassador for Haiti for his comments and now recognize the delegation of the United States.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's wonderful to see you. I would like to just very briefly recognize the first-class work of Ambassador Jaime Aparicio on behalf of the U.S. mission. Ambassador Aparicio has served Bolivia well at a pivotal and sometimes difficult time. Several distinguished ambassadors have already talked about Ambassador Aparicio's professional, academic, and personal qualifications. However, I would just like to say from a very heartfelt position of the U.S. mission that we have always found Ambassador Aparicio to be exceptionally well prepared, thoughtful, reasonable, and a strong advocate for Bolivia's interest in the OAS. When we have a difficult issue, we know we can count on Ambassador Aparicio to come up with diplomatic solutions that find broad support. Thank you, sir, for your service to Bolivia, for your service to the Organization of American States, and to the greater good of the hemisphere. We wish you the best of luck in the next stage of your professional life and urge you to keep in touch with all of your friends here at the OAS. Thank you very much.
We thank the delegation of the United States. I now recognize the permanent observer of France.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to take the floor now to recognize our friend and colleague, Ambassador Aparicio. I was so happy to have the chance to get to know him before lockdown. We would often discuss in the Hall of Delegates in French because his French is excellent. We know that he worked for the organization with great professional. He has impressive experience in various areas, and this helped the organization during difficult times. I was so glad to get to know you, and I wish you the very best, and I hope we can stay in touch. Thank you.
We thank the distinguished ambassador of France, and will now recognize the Secretary General.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. It's a great pleasure to be here.
We are bidding farewell to Ambassador who has been here for quite some time and throughout his tenure has showed that he can rise to the occasion and fight for democracy in his country and the hemisphere. Jaime Aparicio, it has been an honor to have you as a permanent representative. During your tenure, you were an ongoing ally in upholding democracy in times of the pandemic and a strong critic of dictatorships. You always fought for more democracy in the hemisphere. I, without a doubt, can recognize the values that are at the base of your work. I also recognize the clarity of your work and the thoughtfulness of your arguments, which were very productive throughout your time at the OAS. We appreciate the way that you have fought for democracy in Bolivia, the way you conducted yourself during the Bolivian elections when you served as an impartial observer of the institutions in your country. We were immediately able to acknowledge the results of the election in Bolivia, and with the same certainty, we can recognize your effort in that process. We have seen a free election in this difficult time, and we hope that is a permanent legacy for democracy in Bolivia. And that certainly should not be altered at all by the future political system in the country. We know that democracy is something that should be upheld despite what ideologies we have, regardless of the political ideas reigning at the time. We need to defend those principles at all times because those principles are essential for the well-being of our people. We do not want to see any setbacks in Bolivia. As Manuel Gonzalez said, Bolivia moved from an electoral system plagued with irregularities to an electoral system that granted victory to the right people. A fraternal hug, and I'm sure that we will continue to cross paths.
We thank the Secretary General for his remarks. And it is now my pleasure to offer the floor to Ambassador Aparicio. Ambassador, you have the floor.
Embajador Aparicio, si puede solicitar la palabra, por favor.
Ambassador Aparicio, could you please request the floor? If your button is not working, you could refresh your browser and see if that fixes the problem.
Está un poco así la pongo. Ya. Está bien, ya está.
Yes, we can hear you. You have the floor, Ambassador.
Lo escuchamos.
You, Madam Chair, sorry, something happened with my computer. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. First and foremost, I would like to thank those who spoke, which includes the Ambassador of Colombia, Ambassador Charles, Ambassador Rita from Guatemala, as well as the Secretary General and the delegate of the United States and Canada, Ambassador Ansett. I would like to thank all of you for your words of friendship and generosity. It is sincerely a very emotional time when one leaves the OAS and hears friends and colleagues express themselves as they have today. So thank you all. Today, it is my privilege to bid you farewell as a permanent representative of Bolivia to the OAS with the satisfaction of knowing that We fulfilled a historic responsibility under a government whose mandate was to ensure the transition of a country from the threshold of tyranny to the restoration of democratic institutions. It has not been an easy task. Bolivia and all of you have been able to see this. There has been an enormous international disinformation campaign saying that there was no electoral fraud, that there was a coup d'etat, and that the government had the alleged intention to remain in power. All of that has been proven incorrect over the last few days through an election that took place in an environment of peace and tranquility, and with a president who enjoys national and international prestige, and with the verification of an organization like the OAS, which once again has proven its competence and independence. As you know, the culmination of the crisis in Bolivia was the intentional manipulation of votes. This was well documented in an audit that, as a Bolivian historian Robert Brockman points out, is the most complete report produced by an international organization. For that reason, we would like to thank the Secretary General, as well as Secretary Guerrero and Gerardo de Casa, for the work that they have done throughout these last two elections. This year that I have been here under the government of President Áñez, there were certain things that were not divulged internationally because there was great interest in not divulging it, and that is that the government respected constitutional order and was president while the Legislative Assembly had a 2/3 majority under President Morales' party. Unfortunately, as a result of this serious fraud, there are wounds in Bolivia that have not been healed. Despite the fact that the elections were held in an environment of great peace with lots of trust in the electoral authority and the OAS, over the last few days, we have seen the resurgence of certain forms of protest, certain very large movements, above all in the east of Bolivia. And these protests are no longer about what happened on election day itself, but rather about previous electoral patterns. An increasing number of civil society organizations, and even today, a member of the Supreme Electoral Tribunal, are asking the tribunal and its chair, Salvador Romero, to work with the OAS to review the biometric data and compare them to the electoral books, because this is a review that would put the population at ease and ensure that the elections are fair. I would also like to inform you, because we need to be better safe than sorry, that there is another conflict that is generating great social turmoil in Bolivia, and Foreign Minister Longevic spoke about this morning. That is the surprising decision by the Legislative Assembly that is leaving power. Our new legislators have even received their credentials, but this lame duck Congress, this lame duck Legislative Assembly, before leaving, has decided to reduce the threshold for decision making. It used to require 2/3 for important decisions on congressional laws to a 51% majority. This has been staunchly rejected in our country and has showed once again that in our region, elections on their own are not synonymous with democracy. This measure will prevent the Legislative Assembly. This rule will allow the Legislative Assembly to take decisions over the next 5 years with just a simple majority and without the proper oversight. This could affect the separation of powers of state, respect for minorities, alternating positioning, and independent justice. If any of those factors are absent, there is no rule of law. For that reason, one of the main roles of the OAS and the Permanent Council as guarantors of the Inter-American Democratic Charter to be on guard so that an unfortunate strategy of winning elections and that the winner of those elections dismantle the essential components of democracy. One reason why many democratic experiments have failed in Latin America, above all, is that they place too much emphasis on elections and very little emphasis on other essential components of democracy. The most successful democracies in the world have worked in large part because they resisted the temptation of thinking that by winning elections, the majority party has the ability to do whatever it wants and manipulate other powers of the state. Today, our region has a well-organized, well-financed international sphere, which is promoting situations like what happens in Cuba and Venezuela. Citizens who are able to express their dissent publicly would be the greatest threat to any totalitarian regime. Today, we see subtle actions and ideological projects that are seeking hegemonies in our region, expressed through the group of Puebla and using official speech to promote lies and modify history ideologically, spread propaganda, provide diffuse sources of financing, and promote a lack of democratic values. Above all, they are seeking to polarize reality and create many false binary situations like liberal versus conservative, rich versus poor, when in reality what they are seeking to do is homogenize thought in societies where, as Octavio Paz says, under different names and attributes, 1,000 different faces reign. Unlike in totalitarian regimes, true democracies must not be seen as abstract totalities, but rather as collections of free and independent people. Colleagues, Chair, Mr. Secretary General, Mr. Assistant Secretary General, in taking charge of this mission and participating in the Permanent Council for the first time, I expressed that the main goal of my mission and my government was to hold elections, ensuring that the electoral authority was independent and that the OAS could participate in this election. That promise has been kept, and today I can leave this body satisfied. I would like to thank all of you for the support that I have received from this Permanent Council, as well as the friendship and ongoing support of the Secretary General of the Organization of American States, Luis Almagro. I would also like to express my thanks to the entire OAS, the counselors and advisors, Anna O'Brien, everybody who has allowed my mission to operate. And above all, I would like to thank Aladi, the Lima Group, and my friends who have spoken today, such as Ambassador Adset and the Permanent Representative of the United States. And obviously, as was said this morning, Ambassador Simas and Ambassador Khativas are wonderful diplomats from whom I have learned a lot. Ambassador Ordonez made me very emotional with those words of solidarity, which have characterized our relationship over the years that we have worked together. Thank you all. Farewell, and I hope that we will be seeing each other on an ongoing basis, because I will still be in Washington for a while. Thank you very much, Chair.
Ambassador Aparicio, thank you for your comprehensive remarks. We wish you and your family, we wish you and your family all the very best in your next endeavors. And we thank you for your contribution to the Permanent Council. Farewell. Distinguished representatives, we will now proceed to the next item on the agenda, other business. I now ask if there are delegations that wish to bring any informative issues to the attention of this council.
The delegation of Chile is requesting the floor, Madam Chair.
Okay. We now recognize the delegation of Chile.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On October 25th, my country held an important referendum for our democracy. The Chilean people voted on whether to begin a constitutional process which would lead to a new constitution. 78% of citizens voted to move towards a new constitution. A constitutional convention will be convened to address this issue. This referendum was held calmly, without incident, following all health protocols due to the pandemic. We saw higher participation than we've seen in other recent elections. Our president expressed all of the entities and poll workers and many Chileans in country and abroad who voted. With this important electoral milestone, Chile will begin a process to have a new constitution. There will be a new constitution. In April of next year, the members of the Constitutional Convention will be elected. Between May and June, the convention will be established and it will have 9 months to approve a new constitution, which will be submitted for the people's ratification through a referendum. According to our current constitution, the draft constitution will be written by a constitution made up of 155 people, and there will be gender parity, an equal number of men and women. A few seats will be reserved for representatives of indigenous peoples. The members of the convention will be elected based on current rules for electing the members of the House of Representatives. This will ensure political pluralism and inclusion. The new constitution will be approved by 2/3 of the members of the convention in order to ensure the broadest consensus possible. All branches of government will continue to operate normally. And the constitution that's in place currently will remain in effect until the new constitution takes effect. The Constitutional Convention will only play the role entrusted to it, which is to draft a new constitution. It will not play any other legislative or judicial role. Based on one of the articles of the current constitution, the new constitution's text will be submitted to the referendum. It will address various issues, including international treaties, as ratified by Chile. Madam Chair, we held a historic referendum last October, and my country decided to choose a democratic path in order to address the challenges that the country is facing. This was a peaceful process, again, as confirmed by our president. We must all work together to make sure that the new constitution reflects unity, stability, as it is the fundamental law of our legitimately elected republic. These words reflect the willingness of the government of Chile regarding collaboration and dialogue. This also reflects the commitment of our citizens to this process. Thank you for your attention, Madam Chair.
We thank the distinguished representative of Chile and now recognize the representative of the delegation of Ecuador.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If I may, I would like to read aloud a ministerial statement adopted on 3 November. The Ministers of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Chile, Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru exchanged views on measures to address the issue of activities that constitute illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing, as well as the issue of marine resources in areas of the high seas adjacent to marine areas under national jurisdiction, reaffirming their commitment to ocean conservation and sustainable use of its resources, reaffirming also the legitimate interests of Chile, Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru regarding preservation and sustainable use of hydrobiological resources in areas adjacent to maritime areas under national jurisdiction, and respect for domestic and international standards that apply. Reaffirming the importance of sustainable fishing in accordance with relevant international instruments and fulfillment of conservation measures established by regional organizations on fishing regulations. Considering that on 29 July 2020, during the 28th meeting of the Executive Committee of the Permanent Commission for the South Pacific CPPS, a decision was approved to condemn any act constituting illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing taking place in areas adjacent to jurisdictional waters of the member countries of the CPPS. Also considering that on 5 August 2020, at the 13th Special Assembly of the CPPS, a declaration on illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing was adopted. It called upon states to respect and fulfill international law governing fishing activities, including conservation measures, the Code of Conduct for Responsible Fishing of the FAO, among other relevant instruments. It also called upon other international organizations to join efforts and support sustainable fishing policies at the regional level. It called for improvement of monitoring systems, or systems rather, to monitor activities, fishing activities that take place in the Southeast Pacific. That was the preamble, and the ministers then declared the following. They're concerned over the recurring presence of fleets of fishing vessels flying foreign flags, which carry out fishing activities in areas of the high seas next to maritime areas under the national jurisdiction of the republics of Chile, Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru. These vessels endanger the conservation and sustainable use of hydrobiological resources in waters next to jurisdictional waters. They also state their concern over the increase of activities of illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing, especially affecting migratory species and straddling fish stocks. 3, the ministers state their firm willingness to take measures to prevent, to discourage, and address all illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing activities that threaten the conservation and sustainable use of hydrobiological resources in marine areas adjacent to areas under national jurisdiction. 4, the need to optimize mechanisms for coordination, cooperation, and exchange of information in real time in order to present evidence of illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing, as well as promote the adoption of efficient measures at the local and regional levels. And 5, they express their willingness to hold meetings of ministers of foreign affairs in order to work together, join efforts, and bring together common interests in order to ensure the conservation and sustainable use of existing marine resources in the region. That statement, rather, was adopted on November 3rd. Thank you again, Madam Chair.
Thank you. We thank the distinguished representative of Ecuador for his intervention. There be no further requests for the floor. It is now and no further business to consider. It is my pleasure to adjourn today's meeting. The meeting is adjourned.